10 Sports Central will be going over our next final prediction of this offseason, and it will be over the Penn State Nittany Lions. And this is a team that went 11-2 in 2019, and they had a pretty good shot at the Big Ten Championship. Overall, great season for this team, but how will they be in 2020 is what we're going over here today. We're going to be going over your returning production for the 2020 season, along with a full preview and prediction on every game on Penn State's schedule. So with that, let's look at your season trends from 2019 for this team. Of course, once again, they were 11-2 overall. They were 8-0 between September and October, and then they were 3-2 between November and the postseason. So this is a team that was undefeated for quite a while until they hit November, which obviously November was their toughest month by far. They had to travel on the road to Minnesota, where they got their first loss to the Golden Gophers. And of course, last season, that team was very good. So, I mean, that wasn't all that surprising of a loss. But they also lost to Ohio State, which really kind of put the nail in the coffin for a chance at the Big Ten Championship. But some of their key wins last season, they were able to have a shutout against Maryland on the road, 59-0. That was a great win, and I don't care what team it is, if you can get a shutout, that's a good win, and so that's why it's on the key wins list. They also had a good win against Iowa and Iowa City, 17-12, a touchdown win against Michigan, 28-21, and they also beat Memphis in the Cotton Bowl, 53-39 to finish off the season. So once again, I mean, not all that bad of a season at all for Penn State. Looking at your returning production, your starting quarterback Sean Clifford, which he was a big part of this team last season. Of course, he's still got a ton of room for improvement. And in my opinion, he's probably got some of the best upside in the entire conference, and for that matter. Of course, he had just right around 2,700 yards with 23 touchdowns and 7 interceptions last season. So he put up some pretty good stats. He also had a 59% completion ratio, or completion rate. And so, I mean, his completion rate was not very good at 59%. He certainly needs to improve that if Penn State's really going to get anywhere past a conference championship. They also returned their top running back, Journey Brown. He's also coming back. He had just over 1,000 yards with 13 touchdowns last season. And they also returned their second running back in Noah Kane, which he's a big part of this team as well, with nearly 500 yards and 8 touchdowns as well. They lose their top receiver, KJ Hamler. Of course, he was a very early draft pick in the previous NFL draft, so he was a great receiver for this team, and I mean, he certainly is going to have a great career in the NFL, in my opinion. I mean, looking at his stats, he had a great season in 2019, nearly 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns last season. They also returned their top tight end in Pat, and of course, he had a decent impact on this team. He had 500 yards with 7 touchdowns, and so it wouldn't surprise me a single bit for him to be one of the best, of course, rookie tight ends in a couple of seasons for the NFL. That is especially if he can stay healthy, which, I mean, I expect him to, but yeah, once again, he had just over 500 yards, which is actually very good for a tight end. They also return most of their other top receivers, so that's going to be good, but you also got to consider, once again, their top loss, KJ Hamler. That is going to be a big loss for Penn State going into next season, probably the toughest loss on this team in general. Their only loss on the offensive line is a left guard, so that's going to be good. Obviously, I mean, off of most offensive lines, you lose 2 to 3 typically. And so for Penn State only to lose 1, that's going to be pretty big, especially for Sean Clifford. That's going to help him a ton to have a pretty experienced offensive line. As far as the defensive line goes, you lose 2 on there, and then you also lose 2 linebackers along with 2 in the secondary. So this team, especially on the defense, is taking a couple of big hits, and that's mainly where my main concerns are for Penn State next season, is whether the defense can bounce back from their losses. Of course, when you lose 6 starters like Penn State is, you could see a bit of a decline on the defense, which I do expect to see next season. But in general, this offense is looking very good in my opinion. I mean, once again, even though you're losing KJ Hamler, you still got a couple of good receivers coming in, including your tight end that put over 500 yards up last season. So for Penn State, this offense looks good, but the defense has a couple of question marks going into next season. Brings up the question, could Penn State win the Big Ten East in the 2020 season? Of course, Ohio State's been the big dynasty of that division for quite a while now. And yeah, for Penn State, they've gotten really close for several years. They just have not been able to get past Ohio State, and it's really tough to say whether or not they can do that next season. I mean, for Ohio State, I expect them to be a top 5 team for the majority of the nation. I mean, this should be a top 3 team for that matter. I mean, when you got Justin Fields on that team, along with a lot of great talent and a great recruiting class coming in yet again, I mean, Ohio State, that's definitely a team that's going to be a tough one to beat out in that division again this season. And I expect that for the future as well. I mean, Ohio State is just a team that's doing really well right now. And yeah, for Penn State to be able to beat them next season, it's tough to say whether they can. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible. I think Penn State does have a chance to do it, but I just think it's kind of unlikely for next season. I mean, if Penn State's going to beat out Ohio State for the division, I think that Penn State just needs a better defense in order to do that. Brings up the question as well, chances for a college football playoff run in 2020. And of course, Penn State's kind of right up there with one of the best teams in the nation. That's how they were last season, and I expect it to be the same way this season. And so whether or not they can make it to the college football playoff is a tough question. And the big thing that I believe in is if Penn State can beat out Ohio State and win the Big Ten, there's no doubt that they will be in the college football playoff. And that's honestly the only main scenario that Penn State can have to win to get into the college football playoff, for that matter, is they have to beat Ohio State at least for the division. I mean, there's no chance of even making it to the college football playoff if Ohio State beats Seattle. So that's the main key for Penn State in looking forward to the playoff. As far as your schedule looks, you start off the season on September 5th against Kent State. You got that as a home game, so that should be a pretty easy one. Then you got a test against Virginia Tech on the road on September 12th. Don't sleep on Virginia Tech there. I mean, they're a team next season that I expect to be a top contender in the ACC next season. I mean, lots of talent in that Virginia Tech team, and of course they improved a ton over the 2019 season. Can't forget about that. You got San Jose State on the 19th, followed by Northwestern on the 26th. You got Michigan on the 3rd on the road. That's going to be a tough one there. And then you got a couple of really tough games in consecutive weeks. You got Iowa, Ohio State, Indiana, Nebraska, and Michigan State all in consecutive weeks, which all of those games I expect to be pretty tough for Penn State, especially the first two with Iowa and Ohio State. And that Ohio State game on the 24th is going to be very impactful for Penn State, very impactful for Ohio State in general. I mean, that game is going to be very impactful for the Big Ten in general, too. I mean, the good thing is for Penn State is they do have them at home this season. And, of course, they've gotten a couple of big upsets over Ohio State in the past at home, so that could be huge for this team. And it's tough to say whether or not they'll beat them right now. But I think that Penn State definitely has a good shot to give them a good fight there. You got Indiana and Nebraska on the road in consecutive weeks after that Ohio State game. Then you got Michigan State, Maryland, and Rutgers to finish off the year. So, really, your November does not look all that bad. I see your toughest month is October. But here's what I'm expecting out of your September. I think you go 4-0 through your first 4 games. I think Kent State, San Jose State, and Northwestern all are pushover games, especially with them being at Penn State. I think that they definitely should be pretty easy wins there. But that Virginia Tech game I think is going to be very close. I think it goes back and forth quite a bit, but you got to consider it. At the end of the day, you got an ACC team versus a Big Ten team, and the Big Ten is a much better conference than the ACC. So I think Penn State is going to get the win there. I think it's going to be very close once again. Virginia Tech should improve a ton for this season. It wouldn't surprise me a single bit to see them get 8, 9, maybe even 10 wins next season. But I think Penn State is the better team in the end. They got more talent. I'm going to give Penn State the win in that one. As far as your October goes, I think that you do take a loss to start off the month against Michigan, and that one was really tough to pick. I think Michigan, with it being on the road, after a couple of easy games, I mean, you'd expect it to be an easier win for Penn State in general, but I think with it being on the road in the Big House, Michigan's a really tough place to play in general. I think Michigan gets the win there. I think Penn State keeps it competitive. I think it'll be a close game, but I think Michigan pulls out the win in the end. I think the Iowa game could be a close one, but I think Penn State pulls away in the end. And then that Ohio State game, the big game of the season, the most impactful one for Penn State next year, on the 24th of October. I think Penn State gets a win there. I think that's pretty much Ohio State's only loss in the regular season next year. I just think with Penn State being at home and it's likely going to be a night game, it wouldn't surprise me a single bit since it will be a very high-impact game. And yeah, I'd take Penn State at home in a night game over pretty much anyone. I mean, Ohio State is a great team, but Penn State's just a very tough place to play. I mean, we've seen that in the past. I mean, they've been able to take down some pretty high-caliber teams in the past at home. So I think Penn State gets the win there against Ohio State on the 24th. And that's going to have a big impact on both teams heading towards the rest of the season, especially for Penn State if they're wanting to make a shot at the Big Ten Championship, which in this position, I mean, with both teams being 7-1 at the end of October, Penn State definitely has a good shot at it if they can win all of their 4 games in November, which I do not expect them to. I do think they take a loss at Lincoln against Nebraska on November 7th, and I went back and forth on that one as well. I just think Nebraska going into that game has got a much easier schedule than Penn State does. I mean, Nebraska, I believe the week before, I think they got Ohio State, but other than that, they have a bye week before that game. So Nebraska is going into that game much more rested, I would say, than Penn State. I mean, with Penn State, you have had Indiana on the road. You've had Ohio State, a brutal game there on the 24th. And you also had a game against Iowa, which could have been a tough one as well. So you got 3 tough games in consecutive weeks before that Nebraska game on the road. Let alone you also had a road game the week before that game against Indiana. I just think the schedule sets up for that game to be a loss. I mean, when you have that many brutal opponents in back-to-back weeks, along with a road game to boot against Indiana. I just think the Nebraska game is going to be a close one, but I think Penn State takes a loss there. I mean, Nebraska in general next season I expect to be a pretty decent team. I think they could be a 7-8 win team possibly. So I think Nebraska ends up getting the win there. That's probably going to be their signature win of the season, I would assume. But I think that you absolutely blow through your last 3 games. I think you beat up Michigan State big time. Same with Maryland and Rutgers. Both of those games should be pretty easy wins for Penn State. So yeah, your record prediction out of the regular season is going to be 10-2. I think Penn State's going to be a big contender in their division. I think they're going to beat Ohio State. But I just think the other games against Michigan and Nebraska are just going to be too tough for Penn State next season. I think you take a couple losses there, but you still get 10 wins next season. So I think overall for Penn State, I mean, that's not bad at all to go 10-2 through the regular season. I mean, that sets you up for a pretty good bowl game as well. So I mean, that's not all that bad, a single bit. But yeah, nonetheless, that wraps up our final prediction on Penn State. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this team. If you disagree with anything here, I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But yeah, once again, as always, thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed this preview, be sure to slap a like on it, subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel. I really appreciate that. But as always, once again, stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I will see you all later.